Welcome, everyone participating in Financial Inclusion 2024. Thanks for clicking on our video. My name is Sophie Javers, Global Engagement Manager for the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Markets, Risk, and Resilience. We're a USAID-funded research consortium focused on designing and testing financial innovations that promote resilience and empower rural families. So today we are going to be having a conversation between Sumayya Hassan, CEO of Takaful Insurance Africa. Sumayya, welcome.
Thank you, Sophie. Glad to be here.
Great. And Michael Carter, Professor of Agricultural Economics at the University of California in Davis and the Director of our Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Markets, Risk, and Resilience. Welcome, Michael.
And thank you, Sophie, and it's really a great pleasure to be here speaking with you and Sumayya.
Michael and Sumayya have been collaborating for quite some time now on investigating and finding solutions to make sure that financial tools, in this case, we're talking about index-based livestock insurance, are in fact consumer-centric and inclusive. So let's turn to them and have them explain. So Michael, can you tell us a little bit about the origin story of this collaboration? How did you guys start working together?
The origin of our collaboration began when we began working with an organization called the BOMO Project, which is oriented towards building up the assets for poor women in the pastoralist regions of the Horn of Africa. Building up women's assets is clearly very important, very effective, but these women live in a very risky environment, subject to frequent and very severe climate shocks. So we need to think not only about building up those assets, but also protecting them. Many of these women build up a small local shop or other business, which can be quite valuable in their community and also quite remunerative to them. But when a shock hits that business, there's no visible sign that it happened. They don't leave, as I like to say, a digital footprint around which you could build an insurance contract that could remunerate them without a costly loss verification kind of process. So I began speaking with the woman that ran the BOMO project, and I said, well, we've been working for a few years on index-based livestock insurance. Surely we can use that to help protect these women's assets. And she more or less said, that's the craziest idea I've ever heard. You must have missed the memo that that kind of livestock rearing is socially structured, culturally structured as an exclusively male domain of activity. So how could this possibly make sense? And I said, well, that's an observation that's quite valid, and we've been worrying about that. We found out that women were quite cognizant that they are incredibly exposed to shocks that happen on the open rangeland, and really through two mechanisms. And the first and most direct is in a severe drought event in an economy that primarily depends on livestock production. If that economy is hit by a severe shock, then that obviously undercuts the business. No one has any money to purchase goods or services that are being offered in these businesses. So there's sort of direct business effect. But almost more importantly, and what women told us is, yes, we're very worried about drought events on the rangeland, because when things go bad on the rangeland, our partners tell us, well, you figure out how to feed the kids. And there's a massive amount of evidence that when climate shocks occur, it's in many places in the world, it's typically women's consumption and women's assets that are first in line to be cut in order to deal with the shock. So we began working off that idea, like, can we therefore take an insurance that seems to be dedicated to men? Can it actually be made to work for women? So that was our initial concept that we began working.
Great. So Sumayya, Michael said that this is kind of a crazy idea. You're the CEO of a private sector, for-profit insurance company. What was your reaction to this? That women may also benefit from a wholly male-focused product.
Sophie, our tagline as Takaful is a bond beyond insurance. And we always seek to go beyond what may be regarded as conventional within the insurance space and really look at where else is this bond? What else can we do? Where else can we add value? And so really looking at doing good, doing well, and that we can do both together. And so we already had been offering a product as Takaful, where we were offering a parametric Takaful cover for pastoralists, and yes, predominantly taken by men. And this was really for, as a climate resilience product for them against a severe drought, where we would then step in to give them money to buy alternative feed for their animals. And because we had been doing that for a few years, we understood that the dynamics, the cultural dynamics around that, and some of the social dynamics around that were really predominantly it was the men who were taking this cover. And so when the conversation came about what about the women, we were very intrigued to see how can we stretch this bond beyond insurance to engage with the women. And we already had been providing in our other general Takaful products, products that are very specific for women, but trying to translate that into women in pastoralist communities. I like to say it's a niche within a niche within a niche, because Takaful itself in the areas that we operate in, not being a Muslim majority areas, is a niche within insurance, which in itself is a niche in the areas that we're looking at, and then taking a further niche onto that in covering pastoralists, and then adding on another niche, which is the women. And so I was intrigued to explore this, but of course, you also have some skepticism around, okay, is there data to back this up? When we curate products, we start with the data. What is the data telling us? What are the incident rates? What is the uptake? What is the financial capability of the target group? And we didn't really have this as far as the women are concerned. We had a lot of questions. We didn't have a lot of data, but we had a lot of interest. So I think that the mixture of that led us to a conversation with Michael and his team that, it then evolved from there.
So Michael, skepticism is well-founded. Were you able to answer Sumayya's questions?
Well, we decided that it was our responsibility to get some good evidence before we really asked Takaful to step forward and cover the expense of designing and marketing a new product. So what we did is we created a tablet game, a simulation game, if you will, for purchasing insurance, which is called Sim Pastoralist. And in the Sim Pastoralist, it allowed us to develop kind of the storyline and really answer two questions. The first was, how do we articulate to women their exposure, sort of make salient to them rangeland risk so they get in their minds, yes, actually, now that you mention it, I actually am incredibly exposed to rangeland risk. And the second question is, as Sumayya was saying, index-based livestock products had been sold primarily to men, and traditionally it's been denominated in units of purchase, which makes sense to men, namely animal units, or what we call tropical livestock units. And so if you convince a woman that, yes, she has a stake, that she has responsibilities and risks to those responsibilities that are related to rangeland risk, her first question is going to be, how much should I buy? And saying, well, how about 2 cows worth? And that doesn't really resonate. So the second issue we tried to think about is, what's a unit of purchase that can be related, that can be faithful to the original product, but at the same time women can relate to. So we came up with a measure and decided that every child in the family for which the woman was responsible, if you purchased an amount of insurance that was the equivalent to purchasing insurance for 4 goats, that would actually provide an amount of funding in the event of severe drought that would allow the woman to cover the basic living and schooling expenses of that one child. And to test that out, then we used the game, and we worked in Samburu County in an area we had an ongoing project, the one actually with Boma. And we worked with couples and we randomized the presentation of the game. So with some sessions, we would do the traditional male-oriented framing and units of accounting. And in the other, we presented this product as something that speaks to the needs of women and women can conceptualize easily the amount of insurance they might need to buy. And what we found in the game is that the skepticism was, number one, correct, because when we presented the insurance in its traditional framing, women were not really very interested. They purchased insurance at very low rates in the game. And then in those groups that had been randomly selected to receive this novel presentation, suddenly women's demand for insurance in the game more than doubled. So we took that evidence then to Takaful and said, look, a game is a game, but it seems like this way of messaging and these new ways of thinking about quantities of livestock insurance to purchase actually do resonate with women, and it would be well worth a try.
Sumayya, did Michael convince you with his digital goats?
Yes, he did, because at the end of the day, what that proved to us is that, the aspirations of women in pastoralist communities in many ways mirror the aspirations of women in other communities. They are concerned about putting food on the table. They are concerned about the health of the family. They are concerned about education of the children. And so the route to that may be different because of the livelihoods, are different, but the aspirations are the same. And so I think that data gave us, comfort to say, okay, we are happy to put together a product specifically addressing the needs of these women and sold in a manner, in a language that resonates with them, and let's see what comes out of it. Both, in terms of our willingness to try this and pilot this, where there was a level of subsidy involved, which would have encouraged the women to want to participate because there was that incentive, but also where what we call a voluntary product, where there was no subsidy. What would that look like? Because we continue to carry the risk as Takaful, whether or not there is a subsidy. But the evidence and the data up to that point did convince us that this is definitely something worth piloting with an actual product on the ground.
So Michael, once you brought Sumayya and Takaful on board, what were the next steps?
Well, thinking back, the next step was to move from presenting something in a game to something that's a real commercial product. And Sumayya, has many regulatory and other kinds of concerns to consider. So we actually had quite a long discussion with Takaful about how do we talk about this product? How do we make sure, we stay in bounds with what exactly the product is doing? I like to call it sort of gender inclusive livestock insurance, where the insurance could be purchased in both traditional units as well as sort of family units, as we called it. And we had an ongoing study in 80 different communities in Samburu County. And again, we randomly split those up into 40 where business as usual in terms of livestock marketing took place. And in the other 40, then we introduced the new way of talking about the product. And interestingly, this was, as Sumayya had indicated, this was in an area where we had been offering some discount coupons as a way to get people to try out. So we carried this out over several marketing seasons for the insurance. And the first one, the insurance subsidy coupons were still active, but after that, they were not active. And what came out of the study was completely remarkable. In the 40 communities where the novel gender inclusive framing was offered, and after the subsidies went away, we found that the take-up rate of the insurance in our study population was 30% with no subsidies. And that is, in the world of microinsurance, that is remarkably high uptake. And in the other communities where the traditional framing, let's call it the male-centric or the male-exclusive kind of framing was offered, the uptake rate post-subsidy was only about 15%. The other thing that jumped out is the only people who purchased it later on were those who had received subsidies prior. So to be clear, a kind of a more gender inclusive framing is a necessary condition for higher insurance uptake, but it's not the only thing that's necessary. I think those subsidy coupons that made it inexpensive or relatively inexpensive for people to experiment with insurance and learn about it, that was actually a second step that had to be filled. So we felt really that was, for us, was quite a remarkable indication that actually what we'd seen in the games actually seemed to work with real people. The areas where we were studying had the unfortunate reality of some severe climate shocks at the end of this time period. And what we discovered is that people who were purchasing the insurance, women in those households that had purchased insurance, were actually able to very strongly protect the business assets that they built up. And the way we were able to estimate it was that for every dollar of loss that was coming in, women with insurance were able to protect 90 cents on the dollar of the assets that people who did not have insurance actually lost. So again, the story sort of starts to come together. It's still not easy, and Sumayya appreciates this. It's her daily life, kind of worrying about making this thing work in a commercially viable way. But we feel like the pieces are there, and we've sort of found our way together towards something that can maybe make a meaningful difference for women, protecting their assets that they might build up, and helping their families be better.
Sumayya, it sounds like, you were already kind of on board with after having kind of found out about the results from the Sim Pastoralist, the game. And then now we have kind of seemingly, quite impressive results from this initial work. Have you been convinced? Are you scaling? Are you expanding this to see if you can provide that coverage for more women?
Yes, we are expanding and scaling. So from the one pilot county, we are now offering this in 5 counties. And recently, we have started offering this in an additional 2 other counties, on a purely voluntary basis, where it is, the women purchasing, directly without any other form of support. And we believe that this product has a lot of potential to come in as one of the sources of climate resilience, sort of individually led support mechanism, because when the drought hits, it can be very severe, and it may cover a very large area. So at that point, trying to rely either on the local government or the national government, the needs at that point become so many. And so giving people the ability to do something for themselves by way of building up their resilience is one of the things that has really kept us very interested in this particular program. And what we have found as well is when the women were approached in a language that they could understand, because insurance can be complex if spoken about in insurance terms, but this was about something that is very close to their hearts. What do you do in the event of a drought, and you need to feed your family, you need to take your children to school, you need to provide the basic needs. How do you go about it, and what if you could find a way to help yourself and your family during that time? We did a fair bit of engagement through local community champions who speak the local language, using locally available media, including local radio, including being at market centers on market day. So it is really the channels that they identify with, and the structures that they trust that we used, that then helps to deliver the message in a manner that they understood. And I think this was really very important in terms of last mile engagement, right on the ground. And bearing in mind that these are nomadic pastoralists, So they are migrating with their animals from one place to another. Is one of those things that one really has to factor in when offering a product such as this. You really need to be able to meet the community where they are. They are not going to come into our offices, wherever those offices are. We have to be on the ground, sort of following them, as it were. And I think, so we've seen that, and part of what we are seeing even now as we scale is that even as we look at expanding into some of the other areas and offering this as a voluntary product, people are uptaking it. They're interested in taking up the product, and they're actually using their own money to participate in acquiring the product. The other thing we've also done, in addition to scaling by way of geographical coverage, we have also looked at what other value can we add to the product. So where initially, it was a question of looking at how do you help the woman meet her family needs or her community needs, it is also now looking at what else can we add and bundle into this that still comes in as a value add, even if there is no drought. Because sometimes this is the challenge you have when you're trying to sell a product like this. What happens if there is no drought? Does it mean I've lost? No, you haven't lost, because what you've done is actually, contributed to helping taking care of yourself and your family. And then we added a few, we started by bundling something like personal accident, because remember, again, looking at the areas where these women are, and bearing in mind that these are communities that are nomadic, they face all sorts of challenges in their day-to-day lives as they move, perhaps. And particularly in the event of a drought, where the data shows increased, perhaps security-related incidents, increased exposure to gender-based violence against these women. And so how can we build in another product that helps to provide another layer of support in the event of an untimely accident or unforeseen eventuality such as that. So we've looked also at how to add value into the offering, even as we seek to expand geographical coverage.
Oh, yeah, you've really been kind of thinking through all of the different ways to make the products more kind of consumer-centric, in particular, kind of meet those needs of women. So that's fabulous. So I wanted to ask kind of what might be the next steps then?
One of the things I see is looking at the prevalence of drought when it hits. It's the type of thing that when you're seeking to respond, you really cannot be the only one sort of solution provider as an entity, as a Takaful company, that you would by yourself be trying to help mitigate against drought across such vast geographical areas. And it is the type of product that really would benefit tremendously from collaboration with different entities. So we've collaborated with the research institutions, which is really very critical to ensure that we are keeping very live on the data, but also the other collaborators and partners that are very useful in this type of programming and product offering are the different funders. They are donors who are interested in climate resilience offering. They are perhaps national and local governments. There are other, multilateral and bilateral institutions. And it is the type of product offering and climate resilience sort of, solution or part of that solution that requires all hands on deck. It really isn't something that you can have one entity saying, we can do this sustainably and successfully over a large area for an extended period.
From my side, I would like to emphasize two things. So one I sort of touched upon earlier. I think the issue of subsidies, particularly to help people learn about a product, is one we haven't really thought through all the way. Because it's very different. Insurance is not only complicated. I mean, as Sumayya said, that the challenge is to make it as understandable as possible, but to actually have people really understand it and really experience it. For something like an insurance product, it doesn't happen immediately, or one hopes it doesn't, because if it happens immediately, it means people are constantly having terrible things happen to them. So I think we need to think about how do we best subsidize products, at least over a learning phase, when sometimes learning may take a few years. And I don't think we've really systematically thought that through. I mean, other work that we've carried out at the Innovation Lab suggests that insurance can actually be an incredibly cost-effective policy from a government or public finance perspective. And I think we can learn to make that even more cost-effective if we really figure out this kind of subsidy issue. You know, maybe it's a small permanent subsidy or maybe not, but certainly an upfront learning subsidy until people really understand and appreciate how it does. Because I think it's unfair to expect people to invest only their own money in what for them is a new and exotic product. And I think there's a very strong economic or public finance case for doing that. So I think we need to work more on that. The second thing is work that needs to be done to improve the quality of and the accuracy of the index insurance. And I just want to tip my head again to Sumayya and Takaful, Insurance Africa, that they've joined with us with an effort to really take an important approach to this, which is an under-researched area of index insurance, which is how do you define the insurance zones over which the index is calculated. Now that's kind of an obscure sounding, wonky kind of topic, but normally people have just used political boundaries. You know, I call them zones of convenience. You look at a map and you say, okay, there's this county or sub-county or district, and everyone in that district will be covered by the same index. Now, the question is that actually the best way to do it? Or can you define a statistically optimal zone of a similar size, but perhaps one that cuts across those political boundaries? So with the support of Sumayya and Takaful, we actually did that across the 5 counties of northern Kenya that she mentioned. And we showed that you could actually have a tremendous impact on the user quality of the insurance by being a little more thoughtful and using statistically defined, optimized, if you will, insurance zones rather than simply zones of convenience. It's part of what I think we need to also work on is always keep our eye on making insurance speak to the people we want to protect, but also making sure that the quality of the protection that's offered is as good as it can possibly be. And that's with the changes in technology, be it computational techniques, being it new sensors and satellites, et cetera. That's a constant work in progress, and one I think we need to be and it's our responsibility to be very attentive to that. Well, for us, this has been an absolutely fantastic partnership. And it's one I think we've been carrying out in a multi-year conversation, a lot of back and forth. And I'm not wearing a hat, but if I were, I would tip it to Sumayya and Takaful. But I really admire the willingness of Takaful not to sort of blindly take something crazy, I might say, but to have a conversation about it, to work through the evidence, create the evidence, and then move on to experimentation and implementation stages. So it's been a great partnership with us, and we continue to work together.
Absolutely, I agree. I think it's been an absolutely wonderful and fantastic partnership. We have greatly enjoyed working with Michael and his team. Having the opportunity for data-based and data-driven engagement has been so important, and not needing or rather working with an entity whose job it is to really focus from the research point of view on getting the data just creates this amazing opportunity to leverage the strengths on both sides. And I greatly encourage such partnerships.
A wonderful conversation. Thank you so much to you both for taking the time to join us here as part of the Financial Inclusion Week 2024. If you have any follow-up questions, please do feel free to find that information at the end of this video and reach out to us to find out more.